So hi everyone. Why did I just do that? My name's Sonali. I work at Fujitsu and I've for the last year worked on the delivery of the trader support service. Fujitsu obviously are sort of the prime member of the consortium helping to deliver the TSS. So I will introduce our colleagues in a second, but we've pretty much been right in it from the beginning, looking at the requirements, helping the HMRC to kind of understand what the Northern Ireland Protocol meant on the ground, what did it mean for traders, and as we know, things are constantly changing, and as I'm sure many of you are aware, we're still in a point where the service is running live, as well as the programme, so we're still developing functionality, there are still future releases being planned, and this will probably continue until at least early next year. So it's always just really good to kind of touch base with trade associations like the Chamber and just double check that people are comfortable with what the service that has already been delivered. As we know, subdecks continue to be kind of one of the biggest challenges for traders. So just kind of making sure that people do feel comfortable with the tools that come out and then kind of looking forward at all the new functionality that should be released. And as a few of you stated on the call, if you are agents and intermediaries, hopefully you will now have noticed you can be authorized on your client's behalf, so you don't need to log in as them anymore and complete declarations that way. You can complete them on your own account as a direct rep. So just little things like that. It's always just good to kind of coming back to basics. It might be worth, Tony, as we get through the presentation, do let me know if actually not covering the supplementary declaration bit in detail, whether it would be helpful or not, if more of what we've got on the call are hauliers and logistics companies. Happy to go through it. It's just I'm not sure if the detail is needed. So just let us know as we go. As you said, it's a relatively small group, so we can run this a lot more interactively than us just kind of talking at you and then doing a Q&A at the end. So maybe what I'll do is, as I'll show you here, this is basically the flow of what we're going to cover today. But I will pause halfway and we can sort of do questions on my part, and then we can discuss what would be the best place for us to kind of cover in the second half, as I said. So if that's all good, I'll continue. So it's always worth just kind of coming back to basics on what the TSS actually is. We are a completely free to use digital service. We were set up by HMRC in order to help navigate the requirements that came into effect on when the Northern Ireland Protocol did on the 1st of January this year. As we know, the rest of the GB EU controls are slowly being kicked in on a phased approach, but the Northern Ireland Protocol started day one. So it was very much the view of how can we ensure goods flowed in a way that the new requirements, the new administration, all of these new customs processes didn't swamp businesses, and it's been quite nice in sort of the year that TSS has now been live to kind of do how we have seen not just our feedback but also how businesses are now interacting. Change is never easy, and I think we were all very wary of everything that suddenly happened, and it was a massive change, but it has been really, really great to see. And I'll show you some stats in a second, but the numbers have been increasing. It's been a really weird year with COVID. Trade has definitely been distorted. It's much lower than it should have been. But it's, again, you'll see that the numbers have become a lot steadier. So it's been really, really positive kind of seeing A, trade increase, and B, TSS's impact on hopefully helping quite a lot of these businesses. So what do we actually do? One of our core focuses is to ensure that traders feel supported in terms of all of these new requirements. As we said, not only were these a brand new sort of like customs operating system, it's also brand new technology. CDS has never been used before and obviously was now implemented for all of Northern Ireland trade. So, there was a level of not only does the programme need to educate itself, but how do we go and tell businesses who have never ever had to do customs before, how do we bring it down to that level that actually is meaningful to their business? What has changed? What do you need to do now? What data do you need to do it? Who is it that does it, and what are the timelines, what are the costs, etc. So that was really one of our core focuses, and to that end we set up our education site NICTA, or the Northern Ireland Customs and Trade Academy.co.uk. You'll see lots and lots of links to various guides on NICTA throughout the presentation. Please don't worry about taking notes. We'll make sure these slides are shared with you, and if you haven't visited NICTA already, please do, as it's completely, again, everything's publicly available. You don't need any logins to get in. You can literally just go to NI Customs Trade Academy.co.uk and you will see huge amounts of material. We have user guides, we have step-by-step data guides, we have short videos taking you through where the data elements look like on declarations, all the way through to like 2-hour webinars covering some of the more complex topics like rules of origin, etc., in really, really, really great detail. So kind of a bit of everything that you need. We also host all the bulletins, etc., on there as well. So if you ever missed any of the comms and you'd like to kind of see what the latest updates are, please just visit NICTA. So stood behind all the education, the actual point of TSS is to find a digital way of submitting declarations for all goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland in line with the new requirements. As I said, we've really tried hard to be digital first. Nothing is to do with paper documents. You can obviously print at your own leisure, but the whole point is for it all to be stored digitally. You can create drafts, hold them in draft status. You can see declarations that you've submitted, and you can do this across all of your supply chain between your hauliers and suppliers, etc. And hopefully most of you are pretty comfortable with the portal, but if you haven't, it's at the tradersupportservice.co.uk. And as we said, we really have worked hard to try and make it digital, but in a way that supports businesses. It's not learning a whole load of new tech. We've tried to make it as intuitive as we can. And we've learned a lot of lessons along the way, and hopefully you've kind of seen as we release more and more service enhancements, it has gotten easier. But keen to hear any feedback that you'd like kind of processed into it. At any point though, if you ever felt like you needed a more human support, we have stood up a huge contact centre of a few hundred agents who are there to provide support. So you have your tier ones who deal very much with like the inbound calls. You then have your tier twos who have a few years of customs experience and can start seeing, can I answer your question? Is it something to do where I can point you to the right guidance? Can I point you to the correct team? Is there something to do with the portal that I can help with? And if at any point it becomes more complex, it's escalated up to our tier three community who are very much customs experts. We've got two of them on the call. You have Dilip and Doreen on, and these are guys who have worked years within the industry. They've worked as customs consultants in-house. They knew everything about customs pre-Brexit, and now they've been brought under the TSS banner to really help provide that much more hands-on support. What's going on with your declaration? Why are these error codes popping up? Are you claiming preference in the right way, etc.? So that's kind of what TSS does do. It's always worth kind of just double checking that we're aligned on what the TSS cannot do. As we said, because we are free to use and we serve the entire market of all UK businesses moving goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, we can't really provide that personalised approach that a typical customs broker would do. At last count, we had something like 45,000 registered businesses working with the TSS, which is fantastic, but you can understand you can't have 45,000 calls with everyone each week. But we have tried hard to kind of find that right level of support where it is still personal, but it can't be completely bespoke. So if at any point you need more services, as we've seen, there's a lot of agents and logistics providers on the calls, it's best to reach out. And that's a really key point because TSS is contracted on a temporary basis. So when TSS eventually exits the market, the UK government is very keen for there to be a strong network of trade and customs support built up to immediately take down the burden. So, TSS is here to help in the interim. And finally, as we'll see shortly, if you move any goods that kind of sit outside of the customs process, so you move food products, meat products, dairy products, plant products, live animals, certain excise goods, anything that comes under the endangered CITES stuff, where you'll need different permits or licenses, we can't raise them for you, but we can tell you exactly why you need them, how you get them, and where you need them in your TSS journey. So as I said, just kind of a happy look at some of the stats. TSS has now moved almost 4 million declarations. As we said, it's been almost a year of being live. So it's been really fantastic to see as the numbers have kind of risen. As you can kind of see there, they've stayed pretty steady now, kind of across the summer. So I think it seems like trade has kind of settled a bit better now. We've moved by over 1 million consignments. And as you can see, which makes us particularly happy, is supplementary declarations are finally starting to be closed, kind of following the big backlog and the kind of confusion around what you needed to do and who did it, etc. So you can see the numbers are really dropping here, and some really happy service statistics in terms of all of our inbound calls are answered around within 6 seconds on average, and we've had 100% service availability. One thing that I do always like to draw attention to is if you haven't heard of our bulk upload API, and you are a business who moves the same sort of goods all of the time, or you move huge amounts of bulk goods, this could be a really useful tool because it essentially allows our API interface to push and pull the data needed to complete the declarations from your IT systems. It does require a bit of an IT build, but to kind of put a bit of colour behind it, we've had certain organisations close something like 20,000 and 40,000 declarations over a weekend just using the API. So could be really useful if you kind of are looking to get rid of that manual entry process. So what we're going to cover now is just kind of a quick recap of what the process looks like. I'll apologise now if this is really familiar to colleagues on the call. Sometimes it's just quite helpful to kind of bring it back to the basics before we talk fully in acronyms for the rest of the session. But if this is a little too basic, please just shout and we can skip over. So what we kind of talk about typically are three types of declarations. You have your first one, which is the entry summary or the safety and security declaration, typically done by your haulier. You then have the customs import declaration, which in the early days, TSS chose to split into two, simply to make sure that goods did flow day one. So you have the simplified frontier declaration, or the SFD, and this will be completed before the movement occurs. And then you have the supplementary declaration, which, as we said, kind of is the much more meatier part of the declaration. It's where you can do all of the things around rules of origin, claiming preference, and finally, at that point of submission, that any duties will be due if applicable. And now what we've also introduced is the full frontier declaration. So instead of splitting the declaration, you could do a full declaration up front before the goods move. You will need to do an FFD if you are moving goods rest of world. So anything coming from outside of the UK or the EU straight into Northern Ireland, you will need to do an FFD if you are shipping goods into the main ports or flying them into Belfast City or Belfast International Airport. And you'll also be required to do a full frontier if you want to use any of our customer special procedures, so inward processing, customs warehousing, etc. So just worth noting, the FFD is available to anyone who wants to use it, and certainly some businesses do prefer to do it all up front, just so it's out the way, duties are paid, goods can move. But it is, it really does need to be a toss-up between what's better for your company. We do generally say stick to the simplified process because it's easier, gives you a bit more time to get the data together. But as we said, if you prefer to get it all done as soon as you have the data, please do use it. That's what the point of having the flexibility is there for. So as you can see here, this is just a slightly more visual representation of what the journey looks like. We always say step one, please double check what your Incoterms or your shipping arrangements are. This is really important because the TSS model generally thinks of the NI buyer or the receiver of the goods as the importer of record, which means they're responsible for raising the import declaration on the TSS. They'll be responsible for paying any duties. But if you move goods under an Incoterm such as DDP, delivered duty paid, or DAP, delivered at place, it might be your GB supplier that's actually responsible for raising the import declaration and actually paying the duties. So it could save you a lot of hassle, so it's just worth double checking. And how we'll know that is when your carrier logs on, your haulier logs on rather, to complete the ENS or the safety and security declaration, they'll be putting in the EORI numbers of the importer of record. So that's why it's really important to check who it is that's doing what and make sure everyone in your supply chain is comfortable with those roles and responsibilities. So once that is sorted, as I said, your haulier will log on and to complete the safety security declaration. This basically includes a basic description of the goods, the EORI numbers of the buyer supplier, and obviously all the vehicle information that's needed. And the security declaration is needed for these movements because Northern Ireland forms part of the EU security zone. So the ENS remains a requirement for all goods moving into Northern Ireland. TSS has tried to make this as simple as we could in the early days. So what we said was, actually, we can use that exact same data set that your haulier provides to complete the ENS, and we can actually use that to automatically populate the simplified frontier declaration because it's the same sort of things, basic description of the goods and details of the buyer and the supplier. So what will happen then is once your carrier has submitted the ENS, we submit that to the relevant government system, which is ICS Northern Ireland. We then automatically complete the simplified frontier declaration using the same data, and we then send that to the relevant government system, which is CDS, which is the Customs Operating System in Northern Ireland. If those both declarations are submitted happily, we will receive what are known as the clearances, so movement reference numbers or MRNs. As I said, lots of acronyms, so I do apologise now. But you'll get two MRNs, one for your safety security, one for your simplified frontier. We then pass that back to you, both trader and haulier, via the portal. At that point, your haulier will then need to go onto another government system known as GVMS, or the Goods Vehicle Movement System, which basically tracks the movement across the Irish Sea. They'll need to input both of those movement references, one to prove security compliance, one to prove customs compliance. GVMS will validate that those are both correct. And if they're happy for you to proceed with your movement, they'll give you another clearance known as a goods movement reference, or the GMR, which is essentially a barcode. And that's really, really an important step, because that's what you will need to show the ferry operators compliance has been done. And in order for your freight vehicle to board the ferry operator will scan the GMR and validate that that is valid. And at that point, when that is scanned and you've managed to embark the ferry, that tells TSS that the journey has now begun. It's a real movement, and we will then ping you back on the portal to say, okay, your goods have now moved. You have until the 4th working day of the following month. So for example, if you moved goods today, you'd have until maybe the 5th, the 4th or 5th of December, should have checked the calendar there, to then log back on and complete your supplementary declaration. And as we said, at that point, you need to have all of the data relating to your actual consignment, commodity codes, preferences, valuation methods, etc. And if any duty is applicable, that's when you'll need to pay it in order for your import to be complete. So sorry, as I said, it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully most of this is quite familiar to people. But as I said, do shout if you want more or less detail. And then finally, this is a really similar diagram, but as you can see, it focuses more on the FFD, the full frontier process. So as you can see, most of the steps are the same. The only difference is your haulier, once they've completed the ENS, they'll select the ENS only option so that TSS doesn't trigger through the rest of the customs declarations. And you as the trader will log on to complete your full frontier declaration, which you need to do before the goods move. And if there are any duties payable, you'll need to pay them at that point before we submit the declaration to CDS. And at that point, you receive both the movement references again. Carrier will go on to GVMS. The rest of the process is the same. Just once the delivery is complete, the import is complete, there's nothing left for you to do. I'm not sure if it will be as relevant to this group, but we always just like to provide a reminder of what controlled goods are. This is really important because when you begin your ENS declaration, TSS will ask you, are you moving controlled goods? And this has kind of typically confused quite a lot of people, because the TSS definition of controlled is a bit wider than the typical HMRC definition. So typically you think controlled goods are goods that fall under customs control, so excise goods, firearms, things like Kimberley diamonds, etc. But actually what we use it to mean is any good that is under a control by any government department. So this will capture all things like SPS products, or which means sanitary and phytosanitary. So anything that comes under a DEFRA regulation. So live animals, food, meat, dairy, plant products, and as you can see, some ozone depleting gases there. So literally anything where you have to do something other than a customs declaration, you need to tick the box that says controlled. If you're moving things like medicines and pharmaceuticals, it's worth double checking whether they actually do count as controlled or not, meaning like, do you need something special to move them? As some medicines, as you all know, you don't require any of them. And there are some pharmaceuticals which definitely are controlled. So just worth calling that out. And it's also worth calling out here as well, if you are moving goods under a customs special procedure, we will count that as a controlled goods movement. So please do tick the box, because it will take you down a slightly different path. And it's really, really important within the SPS space, or that food and animal space, because hopefully, as you will have seen, the TSS system hasn't blocked anyone from completing declarations to date. And it's very much because, you know, we're still very much in that support atmosphere. We're not really sure where the negotiations are going. So things remain, you know, a lot easier for traders. But I think if you are someone who moves these goods and you have never heard of an export health certificate, you've not been doing anything on traces, things will become stricter in the future. So please make sure you're on board with it now, so your declarations don't ever get rejected. So apologies if no one actually moves SPS goods, but just worth calling out, if you do, or you're a haulier who moves any food products, the supplier will, and the buyer will need to have done some extra steps before the goods actually are moved. And this involves logging onto Traces, which is an EU-wide system tracking the movement of these sorts of products. They'll need to raise what's known as a CHED form, or a common health entry document. And that's where they put in the information relevant to the SPS load. So, you know, what is it that you're moving? Where were they born? Do they have like certain numbers on them? Are they healthy? Have they had, you know, various blood tests, etc.? That's where that information goes in. And at that point, your GB supplier will then need to arrange for a vet check before the goods leave. An official vet will need to come, sign, seal, certify that these animals or products are healthy. And at that point, you're given an export health certificate, which you then need to link back on Traces. So you kind of, there has to be kind of a good relationship between the seller and the buyer here. And all of that needs to be done before you even start doing your TSS declaration. I won't spend too long on this slide because I know it looks a bit scary, but just to point out, this is exactly what I was talking about here. The buyer needs to raise the CHED on Traces. Supplier then needs to arrange for a vet to come sign, seal and certify. You then need to update traces or the CHED with the export health certificate and the seal number, so that traces knows what goods that is that's moving. And again, as I said, it's an EU system. So within the EU, where you don't need customs declaration, especially on the mainland, this is how they track the movements of these types of goods for health and safety reasons. And then at that point, when it's done, you can then take that information and you'll need to add it onto your simplified frontier declaration, because you will be asked for the CHED number and you will be asked to attach the export health certificate. So really, really important to check that you know how to do these things now, as I said, because things will get stricter in the future. Again, just another view of it. So please make sure you know what traces is, you've been registered, you know how to raise a CHED form, you know what type of CHED you're raising, because there are different ones for different types of goods. You know that your supplier needs to go and get an official vet to sign, seal and certify. And then you need to attach all of that to your TSS declaration in order to be fully compliant. And if at any point you're wondering, oh, I do move these kind of goods, but how do I know what I actually need to do? You can visit what's known as the NI online tariff tool. This is a gov.uk tool. You can see the links there on the slide that essentially says you can start typing in what you think your good is. It will show you a list of commodity codes. Pick the one that you believe to be the most correct. And at that point, it will then tell you, yes, you need to do some additional stuff. So I think in this example, it was looking at some type of SPS good, whether it was like meat or a plant good, not actually sure. And then as you can see, the tool tells you you need what's known as a document N853, which is the same as a CHED here, Common Health Entry Document for products CHED-P. So you could be moving a plant product. And then once you've done that, you then need to add that into your TSS declaration. So if you want to know any more information about this, we have guides that take you through this step by step in a much more detail, and we've done a webinar on it. And as I said, here's some more of the videos. So I'll head a bit further before we go for some questions. So when we kind of typically talk about how the flow will work, as many of you have said, you are logistics providers anyway, so you're comfortable with, you're the ones who are typically raising the ENS or the safety security declaration. TSS is automatically completing the simplified frontier declaration for the trader. And at that point, until that point, the trader really hasn't had to interact much with TSS. But when it comes to the supplementary declaration, the onus is on them. They need to provide all of the additional shipment information to understand whether they owe a tariff or any duty, etc. And this is really important because, as we've seen, this has kind of been the biggest challenge for organizations, because it does require a lot of data and it requires you to have a real strategy around your tariff options. You know, am I declaring my goods at risk or not at risk? You know, what am I saying here is, am I a UK business that only moves goods within the UK? So my goods are not at risk of entering the EU. So I don't need to ever pay an EU import duty because it's a UK good staying within the UK. Or are my goods at risk of crossing into the Republic of Ireland, in which case I might have to pay? Are there ways for me to avoid this? Can I claim preference? And this is kind of where, you know, you really do have to think about, it's not just the data, it's what works best for my business in order to make sure that you have the right cash flow, etc. I don't know, Tony, if we can happily go through most of this. I just wanted to double check whether colleagues on the call are submitting supplementary declarations if we're mainly logistics providers. Does
anybody want to come in there?
I have done it on behalf of clients. I've done both the supplementary declarations and the full frontiers.
Great. So happy for us to kind of continue is all I'm saying. I don't want to talk about subtext if you don't really have to do them, but that's fine. I'll take that. I'll just take it as a yes, it's fine. So as you know, so you have to do a supplementary declaration. In the early days, I think a lot of people thought, well, my haulier has done the ENS, TSS has done the SFD, I'm done. I don't need to do, my goods have moved, I'm over it. But unfortunately, you do have to do the supplementary declaration. Your import isn't complete without it, and it is a legal requirement. As I said, TSS will contact whoever it is that's being listed as the importer of record on the ENS. So that's why you've got to be really careful of your EORI numbers. And we know that there have been a lot of errors within whose EORI numbers are listed. So if you think you're being asked to do declarations for goods that you definitely haven't moved, please just raise a case on the portal and an agent will manually remove it from your caseload. And just here we go again, it's just a reminder of the timelines here. So if your carrier submits the ENS today, your goods are then delivered tomorrow, you have until the 5th working day of the following month to complete your supplementary declaration. It's always worth kind of highlighting here for anybody who has a supplementary declaration backlog and is still a bit concerned about it. Please don't worry. We know that these things take a bit of time. And what the backlog actually means is when TSS went live on the 1st of January, there was then a 3-month period where we were only doing ENSs and SFDs while we built the functionality for the sup deck because we rolled out the program within like 3 months. So there was kind of a bit of a delivery gap. So what it meant was for all of those goods that moved between Jan and Feb, suddenly there was a backlog of supplementary declarations that were due already as soon as the service went live in March with subdecks. So that's kind of what we refer to as the backlog. Then of course, if you were someone who's moving shiploads a week, etc., your backlog is going to continue to grow. So across the summer, we've tried to introduce loads and loads of tools to help bring that amount down. So for example, hopefully some of you will have seen the supplementary declaration assistant, which we'll come on to in a second, which basically provided a template if you moved your goods not at risk. So that was basically saying, if I move a UK good within the UK, I can actually bulk everything up to one commodity code, and TSS just provided you a template in conjunction with HMRC that you could copy and paste, and then you could keep copying and pasting it. And then, as I said, other tools like the bulk upload API meant that once you did it right once, you got the data right once, the technology could just push and pull the rest to complete it automatically for you. But there is, still a gap in the delivery functionality. Some of you who move goods under special procedures will have seen, for example, that there are still some things that you might be waiting for. So all we really want to reassure you is if you have been trying in good faith to complete, or you haven't been able to because TSS functionality isn't available, we are completely aware of this, and nobody's going to come chasing you down for being non-compliant or for late submission. But if you haven't really engaged very well with it, or you're still struggling, please reach out, as that's exactly what our sort of support network within the TSS is there for, and we can have an agent take it through with you step by step. So I'll pause there before we kind of delve into that stuff. I don't know if there's any questions on just kind of the general process or the declaration types before we kind of delve slightly more into the tariffs.
I think, because again, we're small numbers today. Rather than going through the chat function, if anybody's any questions they want to ask at this stage, just unmute yourself and ask a question.
Can I ask a question? Just it's kind of a broader question. Can everybody hear me all right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I was really just talking to myself there. Right, Shonali. First off, I was on a call with one of your colleagues already this morning. They're very pleased to hear this. So since this is recorded, I will put this out for posterity. I think what you guys have done is not appreciated enough. I think what TSS has done in the past year has been phenomenal. I have 20 years experience in this field, so I think you actually have to understand that to know what you guys have done. Mm-hmm. So first and foremost, I think what you have done is great. I know you're probably not going to be able to answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. You mentioned at the start, and I know you have to do it every call that you're on, like that TSS is not around forever.
Yeah.
What is the and I know maybe you can't answer this, but what is the likelihood that at the end of this year, once the government's payment for TSS disappears, you aren't going to just scrap all this work? And there isn't enough brokers out there to go through CDS by itself. So surely this will go to like a subscription model or something. I see out there in the ether, there's certain companies that actually use the fact that you guys say that there to actually almost take people away from TSS and try to bring them onto themselves, and then charge them extortionate amount of money by telling them, well, TSS won't be there, so you may well come to us right now. So are you able to even give any slight inkling? Because even for somebody like myself to try to plan ahead, I can't plan any further than next year because I don't know what's happening with you guys.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. It's one that we do get asked a lot. I can tell you that TSS is on a 2+1+1 contract, so we could potentially be extended the full 4 years. How likely that is, it's hard to know. Like I said, we've been live a year and we still haven't hit steady state. So I think it's fair to say, we're going to go the full 2 or 3. And we do get asked this a lot, and I know it's a tricky one in terms of business planning. And unfortunately, the answer does just lie with it will be up to HMRC, what will happen at the end of that 4-year period. But one reassurance that I can give you is at no point is TSS just going to withdraw if there isn't a clear line of support to be built up. As I said, TSS, like you said, it's built up to be that interim service, and at no point is it mandatory, but it is definitely the easiest way through. But we already see businesses who have already opted to do things straight into CDS because they'd rather have their tech systems built up to do it directly and do it right once. But obviously for a lot of smaller organizations, TSS is the only route through. And as you've seen, in the early days, we weren't even really planning on supporting rest of world traffic or agents and intermediaries. It was never within the roadmap. But as we quickly saw that we had one of the best routes and only routes through to CDS directly, it was kind of back built into our contract to actually support these, because it was seen as even intermediaries don't have a better way through. So I would say, like, you know, we are listening, we're always trying to adapt, and we have a really good relationship in terms of HMRC having, you know, open discussions of, are we going to do this? Are we going to do this? Are we talking about another release? And like I said, we, you know, I think there was definitely a view if we would have probably finished releasing functionality this year, and there's already releases being planned into, you know, early spring next year. So I would definitely say it's a very open conversation still, but I don't think there is any appetite for it to be a hard deadline and TSS will just disappear. I think there will have to be clear signs that the market is ready for us to withdraw. And like you said, whether that means TSS switch to a commercial model, whether that means other people can use it, I really don't know what the model will look like. I don't know what will be allowed or not, if that makes sense. But I think there is a very, very sort of strong view of, at no point is TSS going to harm people by leaving. Do you mean if it's seen as worse and people haven't had time, I think it will just continue to be extended until that point is done. But as I said, we don't really know, and it does lie with HMRC. But I would definitely say, you know, just continue watching this space. You know, we've had, like you said, we've had amazing feedback. You know, we're really proud of what we've stood up in the crazy timelines and COVID. You know, most of the team have never met. So hundreds of people working on this, never ever met face to face. So, you know, it has been an incredible achievement, and I don't think, as I said, there's any view for people to kind of, you know, get this done quickly. I think there's a view of that's why I think there's such a big focus on the education part of it. Let's get traders ready so that when TSS does, they actually know what they need to do. They know what declarations look like. It's not just all reliant on TSS. But yeah, I think that's probably the most I can say.
Okay, thank you very much. That was useful, actually, so thank you.
Shonali, Georgia here from Intertrade Ireland, and thank you very much. Content useful as always. My question is, as we support cross-border traders, so we get a lot of questions in about moving goods at risk, and I'm aware of all the options, which I think you're probably going to cover soon anyway. But my question is, so for a business who does it wrong, who takes the goods in and says they're not at risk, and I've had a couple of different scenarios put back to me where they've gone back to TSS and they didn't really know where to go or what to do to solve the problem to retrospectively make that correct. So what advice would you give to a trader who has said they're taking the goods in and they're not at risk, and then they decide that they are going to be at risk?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's definitely one that pops up more, and I think what you'll see in the coming months as the negotiations settle down, there is going to be a huge focus on that not at risk group, whether it will be called the UK Trader Scheme, whether it will change slightly, we're not really sure yet. But I think the view we've definitely got is, if you can prove you are a UK trader moving goods that stay within the UK definitively, there'll be added benefits. But like you said, that's the flip of what if I'm not sure? And Magda will cover apportionment shortly, which might be a better route for some of those types of traders where you're making an assumption, but you can always, can you change it further down the line? And what I would say that, unfortunately, there is no like easy way of changing your declaration around. You know, even we've had issues with this because we aren't CDS. We're not the custom system that sits behind it. We're a mechanism to get things in. So once declarations are submitted and CDS has accepted, it's hard for TSS to even record them. And I think Magda's about to come in, but there are certain forms that you unfortunately just have to go and fill in, explain to HMRC why there's an error. And unfortunately, it's as cumbersome if you're trying to pay or get money back. So I'll let Magda come in though.
Okay.
Yes, so I'll post in the chat links to two forms. Whenever the declaration is done through TSS, it is linked to CDS. So the forms for any over or underpayment duty reclaims that are going to be submitted to HMRC have to be used with the ending of the CDS, because there is a separate form for chief and a separate one for CDS.
Okay.
So I'll post those in the chat. There is two C285 CDS for overpayments and C2001 CDS for any voluntary declarations of duty underpayments. So those would have to be completed and sent to relevant HMRC's departments. But we do have a functionality that if the amendment of the declaration doesn't actually result in any financial changes, for example, the commodity code that was used on the declaration is incorrect and the correct one is different but attracting the same duty rate, then it's called a non-monetary amendment. So this can be sorted by TSS. So we've got agreement with HMRC that for those types of amendments, we will be submitting forms on behalf of the traders. So all will be required from the trader side is just to raise a case on TSS and explain the details of the errors that were made on the declaration.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are the forms posted, or do you have to post them?
I think you do, yes. So you fill
Yeah.
them out online, then print them, sign them,
Post them.
and
Yeah,
email
okay.
them. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Would anybody else like to come in with any questions at this stage?
Shonali, you on mute?
Sorry, the only thing I would add there, Magda, is if you are completing forms, please keep them for your records with your original entry, just for audit purposes, so that you keep all your information handy if HMRC were ever wanting to do an inspection.
Yeah, thank you, Maureen.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Tori.
you.
And yeah, Deirdre, I think that's I think that goes for anyone on the call. Anytime you want to raise anything, whether it's an issue with a declaration or something you want to change, just raise a case. Do you mean just even if it's just a sentence on the portal, it just means that will always be linked to that declaration, and it will make not just your life easier, but our life easier when eventually the much bigger audits start happening. Make it as clear as you can. Do you know what I mean? Show that you've done your due diligence. It will just make it a lot neater. As we know, the declarations are starting to get quite high in number. Great. So what I think we'll do here then is we'll start deep diving into some of the tariff options, some of the kind of more tricky questions. But as I said, if anyone has any questions about anything we've already said, just pop it in the chat function. We've got lots of colleagues on the call who could either answer it or point you towards the right guidance, whether it's on gov.uk or TSS on NICTA. And we'll, like I said, we'll do another Q&A in a couple of minutes anyway. So what we're looking at here now is we're talking about tariff options. And we use this term kind of broadly, but essentially what we're trying to say is when you start your supplementary declaration, do you, as the trader or the logistics provider, have a clear strategy of what it is that you're trying to do? You know, are your goods not at risk? Are they at risk? If they are at risk, are there things you can do to avoid the tariff? And as we'll start seeing, you know, the Northern Ireland Protocol is such an unprecedented scenario that there's been a massive push, at least definitely within our team in the TSS. How can we help traders reduce that to zero if we can? If you can prove you are moving UK goods within the UK, how can we make this as easy as possible for you so that your customs administration is almost nil? You know, get it right once, get it on the system, and just copy and paste it through is kind of where we're trying to get to with the majority of businesses. So the link at the top of the screen is a gov.uk decision engine that essentially will take you through the steps that we're about to go through. So in case you're unsure of what these mean, or you're not actually sure what's the best for your business, you can answer a few kind of questions and it will give you a recommendation. And if you're still a bit unclear, just reach out. Like I said, raise a case on the portal and say that you want a tier 3 to contact you, and somebody will come back and call you and can talk through those options in more detail. We've also run like a much longer webinar with our colleague Shanka talking through this, where it goes through all of these in tons more detail. So, you know, if you are going to try and navigate the complex world of rules of origin and you feel up to the challenge, you know, please just delve into the detail because we have tons and tons of guidance out there. So essentially what we say is we split it into 4 checks. Check number 1, are the goods that you're moving, are they listed as having a 0 tariff within the EU common external tariff? So this will be like on goods that are sort of seen as having like a mutually national benefit. So electricity, lots of utilities, etc., move at 0 rate because it's beneficial for them to move sort of cross-border completely for free. So it's worth kind of double checking firstly if your good does have a 0 tariff, because what will happen is when you put in the commodity code for it, TSS and CDS will back calculate that that's 0. So when you submit your declaration, it will tell you that there's no duty due. So there's not really a lot you need to do, which is why we say step 1, check whether you even need to do steps 2 to 4. If your good does have a tariff, which most goods do, what we then advise you to do is check, can you declare your goods not at risk of entering the EU? Can you prove that you are moving mostly UK goods, which mostly stay within the UK? And the only way you can do this, if your goods aren't already at a 0 tariff, is by being on the UK trader scheme. So hopefully some of you will be familiar with this. It's a government-wide scheme that essentially you have to go through certain registration criteria, which Magda will go through in a second. And the main principle is, are you a UK registered business? Can you prove that your goods, when they move into Northern Ireland, stay in Northern Ireland or are for final use? So, like, are you shipping them to one of your stores? Can you show us the commercial invoices? Are you just moving stock between your UK stores? Can you prove the stock transfer? It's all of that kind of stuff. And one thing that's really important here is people do get quite confused of, oh, but half my goods go into the Republic, half of them stay in Northern Ireland. Does that mean I'm not eligible? Absolutely not. As long as you can prove that those goods that you move to Northern Ireland are for Northern Ireland use, it doesn't matter if the rest of them move into the Republic, because you can choose to do your declarations half-half. So a really, really important point to note, because as I said, we think the scheme is going to get more and more important. So please, if you think you could be registered and you can prove all of that happy evidence, get registered now, because it's the easiest way to make sure you're not incurring a tariff when your goods moving GB to NI. If for whatever reason you can't be on the UK trader scheme, and as I said, Magda will come through why that might happen. For example, if there's certain levels of processing that's not allowed to be, it will automatically be at risk according to the UK-EU agreement. Can you claim preferential tariffs? So this is where it gets a bit trickier, and you kind of have to look in detail at the EU-UK Trading Cooperation Agreement and look at the goods that you're moving and see, okay, my good does have a really high tariff, but according to this agreement, I can reduce it to 0 if I can claim the right kind of preference, which I won't spend very long on because it is quite complex. But as I said, there is a webinar. Please go check it out if you want to know more. And then finally, if for whatever reason your goods aren't 0 rated, you can't declare them not at risk. You can't claim preference, so your goods are now defaulted to being at risk of entering the EU, which means you are now going to be liable for an EU import duty when you submit your supplementary declaration. The final thing that you might be able to do to avoid the tariff is what's known as claiming the waiver. So this is basically just a form that you fill in on HMRC saying that my goods move at such low frequency or at such low volume value, whatever it could be within that GB to Northern Ireland movement, that actually it's of such little risk of incurring loads and loads of EU import duty. Let's waive the fee, and that's essentially what the waiver says. But it's really worth noting this is really only useful if you move, you're quite a small company, or what you move is very infrequent, or like I said, quite low value, because there's a limit of 200,000 euros over 3 fiscal years. So for certain big businesses, they would have used the waiver in the first 3 months of the TSS. Whereas if you're a smaller one, what we're trying to say here is actually, if you don't want to fuss about with 1, 2, or 3, maybe just go straight for the waiver. And then finally, if you can't do any of those, like I said, maybe you're a large processor, so none of these will work for you. Your goods are going to be at risk, and you are going to have to pay the EU import duty unless you use a custom special procedure or relief, which we'll come on to shortly. So I will hand over to Magda here.
Thank you very much, Shanali. So what I'll be talking about at the start is the registration for the UK Trader Scheme. I understand it's mainly logistics and transport companies, but if you do speak to your customers, your clients that are not registered on the UK Trader Scheme, it's really worth advising them to look into the scheme and try and register if they do qualify. So what the UK Trader Scheme means is that you can move the goods on what is called not at risk basis, meaning the goods will not be attracting any payments of the duties if you can prove that the goods are going to remain within Northern Ireland and are submitted for sale to final customers within Northern Ireland. So the scheme was open at the end of last year. Initially, all the traders who applied got registered automatically on a temporary basis, but now HMRC is in the process of reviewing the authorizations on a permanent basis. So we did include the link to HMRC's website as well. This will guide you through the full guidance of what conditions must be met, which we've summarized on the next slides. So next slide, please. There are a few criteria that business applying for the UK Trader Scheme had to fulfill. The first one within the guidance mentioned that you do have to be established within Northern Ireland, but because of the easement that is currently in place, you can also be established in GB, but have indirect representative operating for the Northern Ireland. TSS is in a way the indirect representative. So if your customers are using TSS or other indirect representative based in Northern Ireland and don't have NI establishment, they would still qualify for the UKTS on the establishment criteria. You do have to keep the records of all the goods that you are moving, buying and selling. If, for example, you are moving goods to wholesalers who then in turn sell it to retailers, you should also keep the records and obtain as much information from that's Mark's aggressive dog. Apologies. So you do have to keep the records of the goods that are moving and selling, just to prove in the future, in case of future customs audits, where your goods have been moved to and that they did not move to either EU or, well, within EU Republic of Ireland. The records, as I've mentioned, has to be including the proofs of sale, if possible, to end customers that took place within Northern Ireland. And there are certain exclusions that mean that if you are a processor, a manufacturing business, if your turnover is exceeding 500,000 pounds, then you would be excluded from the UK trader scheme with certain exceptions. But we can get to that on the next slide. Actually, yes. So once you do have your UKTS approval from HMRC, you'll be able to submit the supplementary declarations using code NIREM within NI additional information code fields. This will mean that regardless of the tariff duty rate, your goods will not attract the duty payment at the supplementary declaration level. You do have to maintain the evidence. It's the standard practice for HMRC that any evidence must be held for 5 years. So that again relates to any records of the goods you've moved and where you sold them to. And again, if you cannot complete any of those, fulfill any of those requirements, you should not be using the code NIREM, even if you are on the UKTS. Because being on the UKTS means that you can also benefit from something what is called apportionment. So if you know majority of your goods still go to Northern Ireland and remain in Northern Ireland, but on certain occasions you move goods to Republic of Ireland, then those goods going to the Republic will have to be declared on the at-risk basis. And the next slide, please. So as I've mentioned previously, there are certain processing exemptions. So overall, if your turnover is exceeding 500,000 pounds and you are within the processing sector, you won't be able to obtain the UKTS approval unless you obtain it only for the purpose of bringing your own machinery that will be used in the production process, not the actual components for the finished products. There are certain exclusions from that processing requirement. So if you are operating within a sale of food to consumer, constructions, providing healthcare services and not-for-profit activities, or the very specific final use of animal feed on premises in NI. So those are the only exceptions that will allow you to get qualified for the UK trader scheme on the processing sectors. And the next slide, please. So briefly mention, you can use what it's called apportionment. So if you do move the goods to Northern Ireland, but you know some of them will end up going to the Republic or somewhere else within the EU, you can use apportionment criteria. So you'll have to review the records of sales and find the split between what proportion of your goods remains within Northern Ireland and what proportion is going outside to the EU. And based on that proportions, create your declarations within TSS. So you do have to have a steady trading pattern. If, for example, 1 year you are moving 5% of goods as at risk to the Republic, and the next year 7, and the year after, let's say 6, that would constitute a steady pattern, and you could go for the highest 7% split of goods being at risk and 93% being not at risk. If your patterns are very variable, so 1 year, let's say 5%, and another 30% going to the EU, then you might not be able to use it. But it's good to review your sales patterns and see how they were for the past 3 to 5 years. And then you can inform the HMRC that you would wish to use the apportionment. So the next slide, please. So those are the criteria. As I've mentioned, you do have to be on the UK trader scheme first. Then once you review your study supply chains, you notify HMRC of the intention to use apportionment. The notification to HMRC is based on just the email. When you received your UK TS authorization, you would normally receive it by email from HMRC. I think it's the UK Trader Scheme at HMRC, but I'll find the email address and I'll put it in the chat as well for your information. And as always, it's a very important portion of keeping the evidence and reviewing the sales on an ongoing basis and making adjustments for the future. And as Shanali mentioned, another option to reduce your tariff exposure is using a waiver. So that's in case you do not qualify for the UKTS, don't want to look through the TCA and establish if your goods do qualify for the preferential treatment. And the waiver is based on the state aid de minimis values of up to 200,000 euros for 3 fiscal years. The values can be different depending on the sector, so it's very important to review what levels of the waiver would be applicable to your companies. If you decide to use waiver, the option to use on the TSS declarations is NIH, and TSS quite recently introduced the functionality that records the levels of the state aid declared via TSS, so you don't have to keep, you still should keep your manual records, but it will give you a nice summary of what information should be submitted to HMRC on a quarterly basis. And again, as we always do, included plenty of links to government, HMRC's notices and notifications for your review, if that's an option you would like to go for. And the next slide, please. And Shanali briefly mentioned supplementary declaration assistant as well. This is a functionality that allows you to create a supplementary declaration using only one commodity code instead of declaring individual commodity codes representing individual products. This has been developed in conjunction with HMRC. It's based on UCC's provisions of Article 177. The main point to make over here is that the commodity code you are using should be the one representing the highest duty rate from the commodity codes within the shipment, within the consignment. We mentioned the SDA in this case for specific reasons straight after the UKTS and using the waiver. The two options of UKTS registration and using the waiver mean that you would not physically pay any duties. On the UKTS, it would be waived. Using the waiver, it would be recorded but not physically paid by the company. Therefore, the provision of the UCC of having to use the commodity code with the highest duty rate won't have financial impact on creating the declarations, but it will make the process much, much easier. So we did include the link of to the supplementary declaration assistant that is based on our NICTA site. It's very simply built from, I think it's 3 sections. You answer simple questions and it will provide you with the tables of what information should be entered on the TSS with all individual required fields. And the next slide, please. And we, of course, have got our videos that go along with it for your easy review. And the next slide. And now this one and the following slides give you a summary of what we've covered in the previous slides in more like a decision engine tree way. So you would start the questions from reviewing, creating a strategy for completing supplementary declarations. You would start from answering the questions. If your goods are a 0% EU's common external tariff, if no, then you would review if you would like to look through the TCA preferential treatment possibilities. If that's not an option, would your customers qualify for the UK trader scheme? And on the next slide, if the UK trader scheme is not an option, are your clients' values of shipments and the duty rates small enough to fully benefit from the waiver using NIH? And if the answers to all those questions are no, then you would be potentially looking at reducing your duty liabilities by utilizing certain custom special procedures. So we do have the next section, which we'll cover up in a second. But with the summary of completing the supplementary declarations, this will just give you the codes that would be entered on the portal with the NIREM for goods moving as not at risk under the UKTS, or NIH if you decide to go for the waiver. So that's our advice: to review the strategy for completing the supplementary declarations, see which ones is the most beneficial from financial point of view, and also if you do qualify for the supplementary, if you think supplementary declaration assistant will be beneficial, use that as well. And the next slide, please. And again, that's the big summary of what we've covered previously. And now I can move to the special procedures in case any of the options provided previously to reduce the duty bill are not suitable for your company or for your clients. So TSS recently introduced the special procedures functionality within the portal. So what we cover is customs warehousing that would allow you to store the goods within the warehouse under the duty suspension regime. So the duty won't have to be paid when the goods are moved into the warehouse, but will have to be paid when the goods are being removed from the warehouse. Another potential procedure would be inward processing. That would be mainly beneficial for the companies that don't qualify for the UKTS, as they are within the manufacturing sector. Inward processing, again, allows you to suspend the duty for the period of production time. So you won't have to pay the duties on the components that are moving into the processing plant, but the duty will have to be paid once the finished goods are removed from that procedure, either into free circulation, or duty won't have to be paid if the goods are exported outside of certain customs territory. In outward processing is the opposite of inward processing. So if you are using a manufacturer that is based outside of your customs territory, but you provide that manufacturer with some materials that are later being returned as finished products, then you don't have to pay the duty on the materials you have provided the manufacturer with. You will only pay for any additional materials they've used or any processing labor costs. Then return goods relief is not actually a special procedure, it's the relief. So for most of the procedures, you would need approval from HMRC. So there will be certain applications you have to fill in, conditions you have to meet, and records you have to keep relating to each of the procedures and each of the activities that are taking place under that special procedure. For return goods relief, you don't require approval, separate approval from HMRC, but it does allow you to reduce the duty bill if the goods you are importing were previously in that same customs territory in the duty paid status. The temporary admission again allows you to move the goods on a temporary basis with the relief from the imports, and authorized use is usually combined with inward processing and to the specific sectors. So the next slide, please. So as we've mentioned, the functionality we've introduced means that you can use the special procedures and still submit your declarations via TSS. The standard functionality is that all the special procedures will have to be done on the FFD basis. So this will have to be done before your goods actually do move. And you would have to specify the procedure code that your special procedure authorization relates to. So we've included the guides to CDS's procedure codes and additional procedure codes, as those are quite different to what you might be familiar with on the chief. So the next slide, please. So within CDS, the procedure codes are based on the procedure codes, which consist of 4 digits, and additional procedure codes of 3 digits. So it included a screenshot of the system, where to actually enter it. Each of the codes, procedure codes, it does have a set of additional procedure codes that relate to it. So it is very important to review the 2 sections and see how they correlate with each other, and make sure that the ones you are choosing are the most relevant to the declarations you are completing. And the next slide, please. So again, more links to various appendices for CDS procedure codes and what fields have to be completed depending on the procedure codes you are using. Each one of the procedure codes might have a different requirement, so there might be more information you have to provide for certain procedure codes and that are not required for either standard declaration or are required in addition to what you are used to. Next slide.
Magda, in the interest of time, I wonder if maybe we skip over some of this, just because if anyone is interested in special procedures, we've done, as I said, an hour and a half on every single one of these, takes you through what the steps are. We go through all of the detail, just because I think it'd be maybe more useful to spend like 10 to 15 minutes on questions, if that's okay. But as you can see here, the point of this is just letting you know that, different codes relate to different series, and you might need security deposits. So sorry, I'm just trying to skip through these a bit quicker. As I said, you will have all the slides, so if any of this you would like to go through in more detail, please do at your own leisure. And just to make a quick note on this, which I don't know if it's very applicable to colleagues on the call, but we're just trying to highlight, out of all the special procedures, you need various levels of authorizations, you need to be permitted, you need to have done things to prove to HMRC you can use the special procedure. But return goods relief, you don't need to. You simply need to put the code on your declaration and show the proof of it. So we just want to call it out because we think there might be a lot of businesses who are actually either moving goods from the EU into GB and then back into Northern Ireland, which means they're paying both the EU and the UK import duty. Or if you're a retailer who moves goods constantly between GB and Northern Ireland, you might be constantly again paying duty that you don't need to pay. So what return goods relief literally says is my goods are returning, and here's the proof that they were originally exported, imported. Here's when I paid the duty. Here's my evidence. So just worth double checking. Is there a way that you don't need to keep paying the duty here? So apologies again. I think it might just be worth skipping over this. But if you are interested in any of this, please do reach out, because as I said, we think there might be quite a big body of traders who are using this, who could use this rather. And as I said, HMRC have been fairly flexible on showing what the evidence that you need is, especially if your goods are doing that EU GB NI hop. And then finally, we have kind of mentioned throughout on this call the different functionalities. So if you are an agent who helps move goods from the rest of the world into Northern Ireland, you would have seen we now fully support that. So we've been integrating into all the inventory linked ports, and there's kind of lots of separate sessions that have happened with that group of agents to do that. As we've spoken about, we now fully support customs special procedures, and we hope in the near future to support them on the simplified journey as well. But there's kind of work going into how we would support that. And if you are interested in doing any of those customs warehousing, inward processing, out processing, or you do them already, please just double check that you have your own CFSP authorization. If this means nothing to you, then please ignore it. But if this is tickling any bells, it's really worth checking, because when we do release that functionality, hopefully early next year, you will only be able to use the simplified journey if you have been CFSP authorized. So worth just double checking that. And then finally, as we said, we're really happy to have released that in agents and intermediary platform within the TSS portal. So if you are an agent, you no longer need to log in. You can now be authorized by a number of customers to do declarations on their behalf on the TSS as yourself. And it's worth noting that if you are the agent, there's no limit to how many people can authorize you. But if you are the trader, you will only be able to authorize one agent. But if you do happen to have multiple agents that you use, you'll just have to go back to providing them login details and just kind of pick either your main one or your preferred one as your main agent on the TSS. And as you can see there, sort of on the right-hand side, we have a release that's coming out sort of mid-December, and then hopefully one sort of early next year. They are very much dependent on how all the negotiations go. So as we know, it's all a bit up in the air. So TSS as a program has been working quite hard to kind of guesstimate what we think will happen and make sure we've kind of are able to deliver anything that the government requires. So, you know, we'll, as ever, we will keep you super updated on anything that changes. There'll be loads of education in point, there'll be new guides, etc. And we'll probably re-engage back with yourselves anyway, as soon as we actually know what it is that we need to support. And then finally, lots and lots of more links. If you do visit, as you can see, the NICTA link is there. You'll see there's loads of subheadings. Do you want to look at a guide? Do you want to look at a video? Do you just want to have a browse? Do you want to look at old comms? You can do all of this, as we said, on the NICTA website. So sorry, a bit of a whistle-stop tour at the end there. I just figured might as well just open this up to questions.
Yeah, thank you very much there, Sinead and Magda. And again, just to be happy there because of the number of people on it. Anybody that wants to raise any questions at this point, just if you unmute yourself and come on in.
We've just stunned you all into silence. It's fine.
No questions for me, but it was very informative, especially for the linkage between Northern Ireland, Great Britain and the movement. The slides were excellent. I definitely would appreciate a copy of those slides to circulate among our company anyway. Thanks very much.
No problem. And thanks so much for the lovely feedback, Michelle. I'll make sure as soon as we're off this call, I'll send them to Tony and you can distribute far and wide. And as we said, you know, as you're recording anyway, feel free to send the slides out far and wide as well. None of this is, you know, secretive, so it's not a problem.
Good. Okay. Anybody else? Any other questions?
No, just to say thank you so much as well. Just to reiterate that from Michelle, it's really helpful. And it doesn't matter how many times you see these things, that you always learn something new every time. So thank you.
Very welcome. That's always our view anyway. Let's take it all the way back to basics, because then it's a deep dive. Like sometimes we'll have conversations entirely in acronyms, and then you have to be like, oh, this is awful.
Thank you.
Understand that. Anybody else or any other questions before we wrap up?
Well, in that case, thank you all so much for your time. We'll make sure that we send the slides over to Tony. And if you do think of anything after, feel free to either email us directly, or if you want to go via Tony and, you know, you'd rather kind of do something offline, please do. And we can either, Magda and I can either respond, or we can put you in touch with an agent who can provide that, you know, set up a proper call with you, screen share, whatever you like.
Great. and I said we'll stop recording now.